Hey everybody, this is James Davis, aka James282, doing a video for StoxPoker. I told Nick I would make my best attempt at doing a video for him, so here I am. I'm looking forward to any feedback you guys want to give me as well, because this is the first time I've ever attempted something like this, and I don't even have so much experience making these videos. So over here, the little short stack min raises, I'm just going to jam my sixes in there, thinking he's going to fold like every single time, and he obliges by doing so. I'm just like ahead of his range, and I don't think he can call most of the time. And when called, I'm usually coin flipping occasionally, a coin flip or I'm ahead, I should say, and occasionally I'm crushed, but you know, he has such a small stack that we'll just see what happens. And so like I said, I am going to make this video for you guys, playing two tables of 5, 10, 6 max on full tilt poker. Just to give you a little brief history of myself, I was originally a limit professional when I started about 4.5 years ago. I played limit professionally for about, I want to say, a year and a half without ever setting foot into a no limit game, until Party finally, you know, and here's an interesting spot with the King 9. I could protect. I think I'm going to check back here, represent something a little weaker than I have. 8 of clubs is obviously one of the worst cards that can come. He checks it again. I'm just not so sure that there's value here. I could be getting check raised. I'm just going to check this one back. Yeah, chop it up. He wasn't going anywhere. Yeah, it was kind of a weird spot. I was going to value bet pretty much any non-club river. I was going to get a value bet in there. And so as I was saying, I play limit forever, 2 years or a year and a half exclusively. Just going to fold the Jack 5 even though it's a min raise. And eventually, Party opened up their 10-20 no limit games, and at the time I was pretty strictly a limit player, but I'd been running so bad in limit and just didn't really feel like playing exclusively limit. I mean, it can be a torturous game for those of you who don't play it very often. And so I just decided to give no limit a crack, and it stuck. I actually had a week in my first week ever playing, because the first game I ever played was 10-20, $2,000 buy-in, no limit. I had a week where like I won, I don't know, between like $8,000 and $12,000 a day just playing 10-20 no limit. But at the same time, I was losing around that same amount, maybe more, playing limit. So I just decided I was going to play no limit for full time for a while. So I did, and it worked out pretty nicely. I made a bunch of money right away, and so I kind of made no limit my main game. The one thing that it did cause, though, was me to have this sort of style that is very geared towards beating up on fish, not necessarily geared towards always attacking and ramming and jamming against decent players. Here I will raise the jacks with the thought that I'm going to get it in, because it's a very kind of like an obvious squeeze spot. Twin Infinitives is a good player. He could recognize the squeeze. The Drunkie, I think, will rarely be able to call. But if he does jam it in, obviously I'm happy to get an in versus him too. Plus, re-raising early in a session helps me generate, or I should just say create, an image that looks very aggressive and hopefully bluffy. So like I was saying, I did create this style that was very geared towards beating up on fish. So it was kind of a big adjustment for me when American players were no longer able to play on Party, and I had to play in kind of more aggressive pre-flop environments where I couldn't get away with some of the stuff I was doing, which was like re-raising King 7 suited under the gun in a 10-handed game. You know, I just don't think I can show profit with that in today's environment. I will bet my Ace 7 there, top pair, top kicker. I could think about checking back and trying to induce action, because that's a flop I could very easily miss. But I think that there's plenty of hands that will call there and that we're ahead of, and I'll be checking back most turns if he calls, unless I improve. Or maybe if like a king comes off, I'll bet again. But in general, I think just betting there and starting to get some money in the pot doesn't hurt. And so as I was saying, I did have to adjust a lot once games became a lot faster pre-flop, but I think I've done so. My goal in these videos is basically just to show you a style that is quite different from a lot of the prevailing theory in no limit hold'em these days. Like I watched several of Dusty's videos, and I mean I found them to be brilliant. They were really smart, but I did I did notice that Dusty and I play a much different style. Like he plays, you know, probably a little more aggressively than I do pre-flop. Whereas my ideal pots are generally like pots with one raise involved. I'd rather play those one raise pots and hope to outplay my opponents with deeper effective stacks post-flop, whereas I think he just takes advantage of really running over guys with a combination of pre and post-flop aggression. Twin Infinitives re-raises me. I do have an ace in my hand, which makes it a good spot for me to turn my hand into a bluff. So that's what I'll do. I will just 4-bet. Once again, it's early in the session. If we had a little more history, I might just dump it. But here I'll just re-raise and kind of let him make a decision early. And if he pushes and I have to fold, not the end of the world. If he folds, I continue to create this image that he's going to start thinking maybe this guy's running me over, which is a great outcome for me. So my play doesn't need to work too much to, I think, show a profit immediately or metagame. I'm sure a guy called Jeff W. And wrote something that informed me that if you have an ace in your hand, it's 20% less likely that he has an ace in his hand. So a lot of the hands that he'll want to stack off with there do have an ace in their hand. So if he's less likely to have that, I think his range kind of weights more towards a hand that just wants to bluff there and take advantage of my relatively wide opening range in the small blind. And so, just as a general point, I'd like to say that the style I still play is more geared towards getting money from fish and less geared towards attacking and exploiting good players, although I still think I'm very capable of doing so. What I hope that you guys can get from these videos is a sense that there is more than one style you can play to win. You know, like I said, I don't play a very typical fast and loose style in general. Like here I'm just going to call with the King 10 suited, hoping that I can outplay my opponent post-flop. And just to stick with my aggressive image, I'm going to contest this flop. He bets, I'm going to raise, and then I'll bet most turns, I think. He just checks. And now I have a cool spot because I can check. If he bets, I can call, and then I can check call the river because he, in his mind, he's going to start trying to convince me he is a king. Maybe he does, you know. But I'll just think for a second. I'll think, and then I'll make the call. 4 is just like a total brick in his eyes. I'll check it again. And I kind of hope he bets. I mean, if he checks, I just definitely win. But if he bets, I think I'm still ahead a lot of the time. He checks it back, he had nothing. Over here with the 3s, I am going to put a bet in. Start with the bet once idea that I think a lot of good players do in situations like this. Yeah, just because I want to. I mean, if he really wants to make a play at it, he can. I don't really mind so much, but I think usually I have the best hand, and he'll just get away. Now I'm in a kind of a neat spot because I have the queens over here on this table, and I have this aggressive image working so far. I like to re-raise a little bit bigger with the good hands because I like to start building the pot. And you may think that that's like a bet sizing tell, but people just have no clue what I'm re-raising with. I mean, they're not paying attention. Oh, he had raised to 135 with his queens and 120 with his 7/8 suited or whatever. So I'll re-raise. Like I said, I'm already building this kind of aggressive image, and this is great. People just keep folding, and I can really hope to make some moves on people later once I have good hands. Seven, 6 suited, standard open. I'll be calling if twin infinitives re-raises because I think I have this aggressive image working for me again. And so, as I was saying, hopefully what people can generally get from my videos is hopefully an insight into my thought process um, more than my actual style of play, because I think that while I don't play the same style as Dusty or Leatherass, for instance, I think a lot of the things I do and think about could inform better players. Here at 7-6 suited is a light call. I'm going to make it. I don't want to. I'm still so early in the thing that I don't want to start getting the image as a folder. You know, I think that can be very dangerous against opponents who 3-bet a lot as it is. Ace Jack 2. Oftentimes I will float these ace high flops against decent players, because I mean the ace comes off, it kind of means they don't think. The jack and the deuce though, or the jack specifically, that it's suited to the ace, makes me less inclined to continue, because I think it's easier for my opponents to put me on a draw there. Like for instance, if it was like ace 8 deuce, I think I could call a lot more profitably on just a total float, hoping that he doesn't have an ace. And these are just things I don't mind doing early in a session, because I really do think that I can get my opponents to play worse by consciously creating an image early on. My one issue is that neither of these tables is like especially good, so I do have a full table. I'll call the Jack 8 suited for a similar reason. I think I'm just kind of working on this image so far. Huh? Jack 8 suited is pretty speculative. I don't recommend that most people play that, because it just probably doesn't fit into your style, you know? I think if you play with a lot of 3-betting pre-flop, cold calling Jack 8 suited there isn't going to show a profit for you, because it really defines your hand against a lot of opponents. But for me, I cold call out of hands, and I'm perfectly capable of like cold calling, you know, medium-sized ace there, like ace jack. I'm capable of cold calling a big hand to induce action from the deuce of squeeze from the big blind. So I think with my image, I'm okay. I'm okay just calling there. Like I remember hearing Dusty say in one video that he just can't seem to turn a profit cold calling suited connectors, and that makes a lot of sense, because if you're just like driving action or re-raising, going nuts, like, and then all of a sudden you're cold calling, people are just going to put you on a small pair or a suited connector, and so you're going to have trouble with that. The 5s, I am going to put a bet in. Kind of just protecting my hand. Well, now I hit pretty good card on the turn. I think I'm just going to try to check raise it all in. His range is fairly dry, but I think he has to bet, because I just look like overcards when I'm willing to check that. I don't know if he has like the 9-7, then c'est la vie, but the way he's thinking about it, he doesn't have that. I mean, I think he has something like 6-7 or 8-7. Yeah, not. He just had nothing probably. He probably had 10-9. So that hand worked out pretty nicely. There are a lot of situations where you do need to bet hands like that on the turn. Like if you were a little deeper, I would expect him to check more draws. And if he were decent, but I just don't suspect that he's going to be so great when he sitting with the $246 stack at 510. So I will bet. And it's interesting because a lot of times I'll check. Like if I have ace-king here, which is like, seems counterintuitive. No, maybe not ace-king. Maybe like ace-10 I might check back to try to induce action. But here I like to bet and then check instantly and then call. You know, I mean, I guess you could have 6-7. And now I'm going to value that. Hoping I can represent a bluff and get looked up by some smaller hand. Which may not work all the time, but I certainly don't think it's a bad play. If you guys will just excuse me 1 second, I am going to try to pull up a slightly better game than these, because I mean, I certainly think I could be a favorite in these games, but it's not like so clear that I can make an informative video. Because like I was saying, my biggest skill is certainly busting up bad players. And while I'm good enough at beating good players too, I believe, especially at these limits, I think I can just do a better job of teaching people how to beat bad players. So ace-jack, this is an exact type of situation where I really like to call, because I invite these guys in with worse aces and worse jacks, and I kind of disguise my hand in the eyes of a lot of players. And now I can just fold. But I think, for me, it's kind of a mistake to try to re-raise there, because I'll take it down pre-flop a large majority of the time. That's great. But I find that I get in so many post-flop situations where I'm not getting a ton of action when I'm ahead, and I'm put in tough spots when I make a hand that's not like so great. But I certainly think that re-raising ace-jack, for me, I like to re-raise ace-jack like maybe 25% of the time there. Because I also can't always call a hand like that. Pin Omega. I'm going to call here. Just play a flop. I don't usually trust that my re-raising guys or my raising to the minimum guys are going to be the best players, so I think I can show a profit. Aces, I'm grateful for my aggressive image because I can re-raise them. If the drunk here re-raises, I don't have too much of a tough spot. I mean, you could just re-raise, but I think I would definitely re-raise if the drunk here re-raised, because I don't want to. I think if I just call, that looks so strong in a lot of ways. I mean, it looks like queens or jacks or, exactly what I have. Maybe ace-king. Whereas I think if I re-raise, I can represent a steal. And so he folds, much to my disappointment. And so I guess my long-term goal is to make a couple of videos and get people accustomed to looking at poker through or no-limit poker through a slightly different lens than maybe they do already. Like, one thing I really used to do a lot was cold call in situations where there were fish yet to act behind me and a decent player was already in the pot. And the reason is that, sure, decent players will often fold to your re-raises, and you wind up getting in situations where you're picking up a lot of pots pre-flop and on the flop, and that's certainly a great way to make a living. I actually find it to be fairly low variance to play that way, because a lot of times they're giving up before you have to put a ton of money in. Like, if they raise and you re-raise and you just win, that's a pretty low variance situation if you are re-raising at an appropriate percentage. And the same goes if they're going to call a fair amount of raises and then play fit or fold on the flop. But I find that a lot of opponents, even not the ones that aren't the best, are adjusting to the current environment where a lot of 3-betting does go on. And I find that, consequently, they play worse. I mean, bet's small. I'm going to raise with the thought that he wouldn't do that with like a huge hand. I think he probably has like a worse king or maybe like some naked heart. And I'm just going to raise for value. I guess I could let him bluff it off. If there were only 2 hearts out there, I might just call. But I figure I can just raise, protect my hand against a baby heart, and get value in if he does have some sort of marginal hand that reads me for a bluff. And so, as I was saying, I think my style does take a lot of opponents out of their natural environment, because a lot of people these days aren't used to playing against opponents who are just like cold calling a lot of hands in position, and I'm putting them, and I'm still raising a lot of flops, but I guess it's kind of, if you run the numbers, opponent that will raise a lot pre-flop and continue bet a lot of flops is still missing just as many flops as anyone else. The difference is they're relying on you to miss as well. So I can start to put them in situations where I'm making that whole act of raising and c-betting most flops very expensive for them, because I'm putting them in positions where not only do they need to put the money in pre-flop and they put their c-bet in, but I'm raising like a lot of flops, especially if it's heads up, and or just floating along on a lot of flops, and I'm starting to make their whole process a lot more expensive than most people. And they're gonna have, like, for instance, if they want to win when both of us miss, it's kind of like a heads up concept where that's not always applied to multi-way pots. Even in like a three-way pot on like a Jack 3-4 board, almost usually people have missed, or if they've missed in the sense that like pocket fives facing a bet and a raise feels like it missed and it's going to get away. So I think that by just calling pre-flop, I'm actually putting myself in position to win. Okay, so think about it this way as sort of a math problem. In a 5-10 limit game, or no limit game, a decent opponent raises to $35, and you're on the button with ace 8-7 suited, and both of the blinds are kind of fishy. I love just calling here, and both because I can make better hands against the blinds, and I put myself in good relative position against the raiser in case I want to bluff at flops that maybe like, nudge the blinds but don't really hit them. And so I'll just call, and let's say a situation comes up where like one blind comes along. So one blind comes along, and the flop is the Jack 3 deuce board that I mentioned before. Now our opponent bets into us. Maybe they bet 70 into almost 100, and now I'm in a position where I can raise it up to like 200. And the big blind, even though he's a fishy donk. He usually doesn't have a jack anyway, just by probability. And I've also represented strength to the decent player because I've raised in a hand where there is a donk. So I've risked 235, which is my total investment in the hand, and I've risked 235 to win 135. Whereas if I were to re-raise pre-flop, now I'm risking 135 to win just what's already in the pot, which is 50, which is a $35 raise and the blind money. So in that situation, I feel like I'm giving myself like a slightly better price, and I'm also selling a story. Like I'm selling an idea, like Dusty says, I'm selling a story where I hit this flop. It's not like I'm just re-raising the button, because a lot of guys will just re-raise the button very liberally, and other people know that, and then they start to play back at them, and now all of a sudden I re-raise that, and now it's checked to me on the flop, and there's 260 in there, and I'm in a position where now maybe I need to bet 180, and I put myself in a position where I'm also able to be bluffed off the hand so much. And so I think that's just like an interesting way of kind of looking at, it's like I'm basically just saving my squeeze for when the flop comes off, and it comes off in a favorable way for me. And on the same token, like, my opponents generally won't realize that I'm really increasing my range in a situation like that. So that would be just one example. And I really do maintain that I think that 3-betting pre-flop is a profitable play if done smartly, and you can get pretty liberal with it, especially in position. But I really do think a lot of decent players are costing themselves serious money by not taking into account the players behind them or the type of person that raised. A similar example is a fish raises in the cutoff, and you're on the button with 8-7 suited. If you have two players who love to squeeze in the blinds, it's a little tricky. Maybe you don't want to cold call. Maybe you do want to re-raise and isolate, especially if it's the type of guy, like most fish I feel like fall in the thing where they'll call too many raises pre-flop but then play fit or fold post-flop, putting you on aces basically. Or at least, maybe they'll talk themselves into ace-king or something like that, but they're not quite as likely to come up with pure air. But I do like, going back to that example, if the blinds are not big squeezers and a fish raises and you have a pretty good hand, like a decent drawing type hand, I do like simply I'm sorry, I get distracted here for a second. I do like simply calling and, you know, either outflapping them and when we both make decent hands, or outplaying them when it feels like they've missed. And because you do make that situation come up where you have a deeper effective stack. And like, and by the way, I mean deeper effective stack, I mean like a stack with a little more play in it, you know, because in a re-raised pot, I feel like while fish are less likely to bluff, they're less likely to get away from pairs also, so like I think I can get not great players to get away from under pairs on like a queen high flop when I want to, but I can also get those same players to, you know, stack off with ace 10 on a 10-9-6 board or something, you know. So I don't know, I think it works for me personally on multiple levels. But I mean, the concept may seem kind of nebulous right now, but that's okay. Hopefully I'll be able to come up with some spots where we can explore them. And one thing you'll hear me talking about a lot if I make a couple of these videos is the concept of image creation, or at least image awareness, because I think a lot of good players, this is something that they're very, very cognizant of, like, what is my own image? And I try to create an image of someone who generates action, but by doing so in a way that is very different from most people. Now here I have my ace-7 suited again, and I really do love cold 4-betting. Not all the time in cases like this, but just to show this as an example. Because at these limits, I don't think people are always giving me credit for just like a bluff cold 4-bet. And I have the ace, which once again makes my opponents much less likely to have them. So the naked ace suited there is just like a really great spot. And once again, I'm risking 290 to win. What was in the pot there? Like 170. So I'm getting a better price on. I mean, it feels like kind of a risky play because my opponents have represented strength, but I don't really think that re-raising like a cutoff limper from the small blind for the drunkie, who's a very good professional, I don't think that I'm representing like so much strength there that, or I'm sorry, I don't think he's representing so much strength by re-raising that I just need to like put him on like ace king, ace queen, or jacks are better or something, you know, which like in the old days on party poker, for instance, I think that a re-raise there would typically mean a hand that strong. But so back to what I was saying about image creation and image awareness. I feel that I'm able to create a very aggressive image and kind of a wild image without doing a lot of the things that a lot of players do. You know, like I think a lot of people might see my stats and whatever they are, I'm not even really sure, but might see my stats and think, okay, this guy has such and such a stat, so, you know, I know most people that raise whatever I do, like 18% of the time, typically 3-bet light, you know, which is very, very true. But the thing is, I do 3-bet light, but I certainly don't 3-bet light as often as many of my opponents. And now here the ace deuce, I think, is an easy, punish raise. And I do re-raise light, but in different situations than many of my opponents, and so I think that kind of throws many of my opponents for a loop, because often when I re-raise, I do have the aces, you know, and I do have really big hands, and I think I get opponents to jam it in frustratedly against me in situations where they should just be, you know, turning heel and running. So with the ace deuce, I'm going to continue again, because I don't think his most likely hand is a 10. I think he probably has a draw. I mean, he could have like 6-7, which is fine. I'll just go all in, I guess, and I'll fold. But I think 10 tries to put some money in on the flop. Plausibly, he can have an 8, but I'm going to get to work making him fold an 8, because I think he's not like a great player, but I also think that he is not. I think he's the type of guy, he's like buying in for a half stack, not playing so aggro. I think he's making an attempt at hand reading, but he's not making such a sophisticated attempt at hand reading that he would know that I would just raise most hands and yeah, raise most hands, and then continue both streets on boards like that against weak players. Alright, we have a new player on the left table here, Outplay Asians, who's a guy I know, who's a tough player. Maybe we can tangle with him a little bit, and I can tell him about the video, make fun of him or something, but you know, we won't press the action too much if no natural situation comes up where we could do that. Notre Damer, I think, is not too strong a player. Hopefully we'll get to play some pots against him. Kind of annoying because he never buys in full, but Murata Mama is kind of short stacked, raises a lot, but we have been playing pretty aggressively, so I'll just call with the 8s here. That's a pretty nice flop for me. Checks back, pretty annoying. Ugh. And I'll just fold it now. Probably wouldn't have been such a bad spot to re-raise. I mean, might not have even been a bad spot to call once on the turn. But it's okay to give up pots every once in a while also. 5-7 suited. It's a very easy raise against this exact specific player. So I think he's, again, a type of player that I can sell a story to without him like putting me on a pure bluff. He calls once. I turn a pretty nice card. Ooh, that's a tough spot. I'll call for time for a second here. See, I think. Well, let's check his poker ice stats here. I can figure out how to do that. Alright, so he does seem to fold a turn bets like 60% of the time. I'm going to bet it. I'm going to bet it pretty strong to make him think. I mean, I did think for a while, which is like kind of annoying because weaker players will put you on bad hands when you do that. So he calls again. Oh boy. Calls pretty much instantly. I don't think I can get him to fold a jack, but a draw is still a possibility. I think I just have to put the last bet in there. And phew. So that was kind of a tricky hand. I think Queen 10 is a fairly likely hand for him. I think sometimes he can fold a jack. I think he could fold a 6 at that point. So I think I just needed to put the last barrel in. I think he from his poker ace stats, he was folding the flop bets like 60%, folding the turn bets 60%, so his range is a little more polarized to a decent hand. But when the ace comes off on the river, it's just a lot less likely that he'll have an ace, obviously. You know, that really, there's only 2 late aces left. And so I think like a huge disaster there is when I just check and he checks back like 8 high diamond draw and just gets the pot shipped to him. So I'm getting a pretty good price to get the rest in. You know, I think I'm getting like 1-to-1, so he just needs to fold 50% of the time, and I show an immediate profit. And if he calls, you know, I get some at least donk image gains, and I get to, you know, and then he also still doesn't even have a full stack, so I can play back in the middle. The rock over there looks like it's 24 and 13 pitch calls, which makes it a spot where I'd like to squeeze, I think. Once again, I have the ace, which makes it less likely for the rock to have an ace. I think he can 3-bet me pretty light, but, or 4-bet me rather pretty light, but, you know, I'll just re-raise and I'll be happy to win. I'm getting a good price on my bluff since there's a caller. The drunkie, I'm going to check and just make the nuts because I'm the luckiest man alive. But I like to kind of check there, and it's kind of annoying because now I've kind of overrepresented my hand strength. Because most decent players will c-bet air there, which essentially 6s is. I mean, it has showdown value, obviously. But I'm hoping to represent a king when I check back there, which is kind of like and he had 8s, so I guess he wasn't buying what I was selling at all. But I still stand by the fact that I think checking back there, if I have like Jack 10 off, I like to check back there a lot. I mean, I won't be raising Jack 10 off under the gun, but just because it's sitting right in front of me. If I have like Jack 10 suited, we'll say I'll check back. Because I can turn a lot of draws in case he does have a hand, and I can also... I feel like I am representing strength, especially because I think a lot of my opponents do see me as kind of a donkey. And when I all of a sudden am coming up with like a check, I think that kind of freaks my opponents out a little bit, because they're thinking like, man, if this guy has Jack 10, he's just got to bet this, you know, and I know he's raising all these hands out of the gun, and he's just like betting all the time. So I think against good players, that's a pretty effective way for me to represent a bluff. Looks like we have a new table. Let's see how it looks. That table actually looks okay, but although I kind of like the tables we're on now, because we're developing a history. You know, I'll just stick with our tables and kind of see how this table develops. Queen Jack off. Oh, I'll just pitch it. It's not a hand I love. Raising in that spot just because these guys are pretty squeezy, and I don't know. I don't need to get it in there with Queen Jack. It's not like such a great hand. I'm not making tons of awesome disguised nut hands and stuff with that. So 10-7 suited I will raise. Once again, realizing that this is looser than most people play under the gun. But one concept that might be a little underexplored is the fact that people generally don't really understand that, like, pre-flop play and hold'em, this is more of a limit concept, but pre-flop play and hold'em can never be so wrong, you know, depending on what your opponents do. Like, putting $35 in there can never be so wrong. If the worst case that happens is I lose $35 every time, which is just clearly not the case, then I'm not in great shape. But if the best thing that can happen is that I can like make these disguised hands and stack people off and like tilt them, then I feel like I'm making a decision. So here I have the Queen 9, which is, this is kind of interesting because I've underrepresented. I think I need to call here. I kind of was just like floating along on the flop. I guess now I'm in a situation where I'm going to have to be calling. $400. He's representing so much strength. The thing is, he's going to have a lot of trouble putting me on like a 2-pair type hand. I think I'm going to call time here. I think from his perspective, my most likely hand is like a Jack 10 type hand. I'm not so sure he would bet worse for value though. He bets so much. I have such kind of a weird image. I'm going to call here. Not expect to be good like so often, but I really don't. Well, how often do I need to be good? Yeah, not like a third of the time. I'll just call. Yeah, very good. Yeah, see, that was a situation where I really did feel like by just calling when I had 2-pair, I was, you know, kind of selling a different story. And that's not a board where you would like typically slow play. Like I have the nuts there, I'm always getting it in. But the 8-5 suited, I'm gonna check. Consider turning my hand into a bluff on the river. I mean, I probably needed to bet the turn if I wanted to do that. You know, I have showdown value here. I'm not going to try to represent a queen. Yeah. Oh well. I don't think I'm virtually certain he won't fold that after it gets so far. I don't need to try to represent some naked queen. So back to the Queen 9 hand, which I think is interesting. I think it's like not clear on any street. You know, I think defending in the first place wasn't so clear. but in position with my image, I think that I can make a profit with it. Ace Jack 9 flop, I think I do need to call there at least. I can consider raising. And then when the queen comes off and he bets, I'm kind of in an interesting spot because I can try to raise, represent a flush draw or some sort of thing like that, but draws do get there, you know, like 10-8. I think a lot of people call King 10. So I think I can represent some real strength by raising, especially since it was a rainbow flop. I don't expect to necessarily get the rest in against like King Queen there, or Ace King rather. So I think just calling, and I think one kind of mistake in my thinking was that by just calling the turn, I think I kind of need to call the river because I've kind of turned my hand into a bluff catcher. You know, I think if he checks the river, I'm going to be betting again, or I'm going to be betting for value clearly, but my hand just looks so weak, and it's such a terrible board for like a naked ace, which is in his eyes probably a ton of my range. So I think I just need to suck it up and put the money in the pot, because really 2-1 isn't such a bad price there. If I need to be good a third of the time, I'm going to be good a third of the time. I don't think I really need to think that for that hard, and I think if I wasn't making a video, I wouldn't have thought so hard. I would have just shoveled the money into the pot and hoped it started coming my way. So I am going to wrap it up in about 3 or 4 minutes here, but I hope this video was somewhat instructive, and I hope that I'm kind of setting the framework to make a couple other videos in the future, and hopefully expand upon a lot of the ideas that I've explored so far, because I really do think that thinking outside the box and trying to think outside of the typical, thinking about more than just like trying to 3-bet your opponents a lot and trying to create a wild image by a lot of pre-flop 3-betting. I think that kind of looking outside the box and informing the way you play, if it does happen to be what I'll call like, and this is by in no means meant to be derogatory or anything like that, because I believe the style is very much a winning style, but like the typical poker video style, I'll say, where like, like ever since these poker videos started coming about, I think games were very much geared towards like pre-flop mind games and light 3-betting and so on. I think that hopefully I can help you guys work on a strategy that doesn't get exploited by that strategy, because in the beginning I certainly was, like by opening so many hands and cold calling a lot, I think I was getting squeezed out. I was giving away a lot of money pre-flop, but hopefully we can come up with a strategy, or at least display a strategy that will make us a favorite against a lot of the people who try to play that strategy but don't fully understand the exploitable aspects of it. And what I mean is that, they see guys making videos, they see Leatherass 3-betting and so on, and Leatherass does a really good job of explaining why he does a lot of the things he does, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily listen to the explanations behind plays. They just see the plays and kind of view them in a vacuum. Hopefully we can, or I can, talk about a strategy that will show a profit against these players that put a lot of action in pre-flop, and also, or at least at the very least, not be exploited by them, while also capitalizing way more effectively when we have bad players at the table. Because to be honest, I think in Hold'em a lot of people overestimate their edge against other decent players. Like, I don't think many decent players are making tons of money off the other decent players. Like, I think winning players, like people that have winning expectations, are not usually winning a ton of money off of each other. And so hopefully I can help show a strategy that will help us beat certain players, beat fish for more, and maybe beat other decent players, but at least not lose much of them. Now, I play Asians here. I know that he does not call a lot of raises. He's a friend of mine, he's told me that. But also, just by showing his stats, a very limited sample size, but 27-27 just means that he's very likely to open a ton of hands on the button, and like so unlikely to call my re-raise. So if all he does there, which it's probably not true, but if all he does there is like fold or re-raise, then I'm getting a really good price to just re-raise my queen 10, take some high cards out of his range and try to take it down right there. But I think I am going to wrap it up for now. I hope everyone found this instructive, and I would love to hear what anyone thinks about how I play or what I can work on for the next video. And so I'll just fold the sixes here and shut down. And what I can think about for the next video, because I would like to make a couple videos and hopefully get a little bit better at this. I hope you appreciated my first raw attempt, and I look forward to hearing any comments or criticisms. Thanks a lot.